If I told you just a few months ago, hey, the ATF and the NFA are actually going away forever, what would you have said? I'm actually interested to hear some answers because now I'm going to fill you in on what's going on with both of these two entities, the ATF and the NFA, that could essentially see them shut down or majorly reformed forever, leaving gun owners, our guns, our rights, and our dogs alone forever. We are waking up to a brand new reality where rights are finally restored to the way they should be. And I actually like this approach a lot. And just a couple of months ago, I was talking about SBRs and how I thought that might have been a stretch to remove these, but something was brought to my attention that actually I was kind of short-sighted in just a couple of months ago. I didn't see this at first, but now I do with some new information that's come out or a different perspective. Let me put it like that. And of course, I think this is very exciting. I'm going to share my opinion. I want to hear your opinion as well. Leave that down below. Let's go ahead and jump right in. Let's talk about something that is actually happening right now. I made a video just a couple of days ago talking about Kash Patel and how he has not been active at the ATF. And this, I thought, was kind of part of the plan, right? To just say the ATF doesn't need a director. If they're going to merge with the DEA, and essentially take these two organizations and consolidate all their resources, well, it clearly proves that as long as regulatory responsibilities, which are unfortunately still there, they have to continue to keep FFLs going and stuff like that. Otherwise, what is the ATF there for? They're going after people that are illegally in our country and actually focusing on law enforcement. Well, it turns out when I was making that video, Kash Patel actually has been removed from that position. But it's not in a bad way, at least as far as we know. Dan Driscoll has stepped up. Now, he's actually the Army Secretary, and he's going to have yet another dual role with being the interim director at the ATF. Now, as far as Dan Driscoll's, like, just straight up opinion on the Second Amendment, is this an absolute Second Amendment guy? Is he lukewarm on it? I don't really know. I haven't been able to find out a lot about him, to be quite honest with you. I know that he was in the military, and when he made a Congress run, he talked about being pro-gun, but unfortunately we know pro-gun, there's many meanings to that statement. So it's kind of hard to prove how much of an absolute or just lukewarm Second Amendment guy this actually is. But until we find out more about him and actually get a statement, there's not a lot that I can say, whether this is going to be a good move or just kind of run-of-the-mill. One thing it does tell me, though, is that with the dual position, right, the full-time positions being held by yet another cabinet member, that the president still does not see this as a role that necessarily needs to be filled by somebody permanent. We've seen people let go that have been with the ATF for a long time, people that are stepping away. And to me, it's quite obvious when you look at the morale at the ATF that they're not on the best terms right now. They've been wandering around pretty much aimlessly since Trump took over, and it's kind of like, what are we doing? What's our mission now? And aside from setting some agents to the border and helping ICE and doing immigration stuff, they've been largely leaderless. Which again, I think points to Dan Driscoll or anybody else that says, hey, this agency is not as important. And when the priority is not going after gun owners, zero tolerance policies, and of course, knocking on doors and taking the lives of gun owners, I still think this might be part of the plan, if not to shut it down, drastically reform this agency. And a part of Trump's plan to essentially shrink the size of government, because there's so much kind of cross information and things that the ATF, the DEA, the FBI, they're all kind of working on, that it's like, do we really need leadership at each one of these places, or do we even need them at all? But that brings up an interesting point, because Biden weaponized the ATF so much that now we've seen this complete reversal. We have a Second Amendment task force that has been created through Pam Bondi, of course, to protect the Second Amendment, to litigate and make sure that infringements are actually going to be lifted. Now that's kind of interesting. If the ATF is absolved, does this Second Amendment task force then take over regulatory responsibilities so FFLs can continue to serve their constituents, right? So people can still exercise their rights. And if FFLs, actually need their licenses renewed, right? If this system stays in place, you got to have people that are able to do that. Part of those regulatory responsibilities may be removed altogether. Not only are pistol braces finally, on a federal level, right? We have a president and a Justice Department that is saying, hey, pistol braces, of course, are totally legal. But this is what leads to the potential destruction of the NFA. House member Roger Clyde out of Georgia and Senator Roger Marshall out of Kansas have introduced the SHORT Act, Stop Harassing Owners of Rifles Today, which will take your SBRs, your SBSs, and AOWs off of the NFA registry all the way around. Now they're doing this, and this is kind of part of the short-sightedness on my part just a couple of months ago because of what Biden did to upwards of 40 million people, trying to make them felons or put them on a registry with the pistol brace ruling. So essentially, if we have 40 million people with braces, and you see basically no crimes being committed with these pistols with braces, then why do we need NFA rules and registries and taxes on short barrel rifles and shotguns? Because what we see is largely, right? I mean, the vast majority, the overwhelming majority of law-abiding gun owners just using them for their own personal protection, for their own needs, not going out there and doing harm. Now, this is something we already know. Remember, we're paying for the sins of gangsters in the 20s and 30s, still to this day. And you know what happened when the NFA Act came along? Nothing. Gangsters, they still used, right, Tommy guns. That was a very popular gun for them. 1911s, shotguns, nothing changed, right? There's very conflicting data on whether crime rate went down or went up. And what that tells me is that it really depends on how they're defining crime rates and, was it 3 or 4 people, or were these people actually hurt, and where did this happen? I mean, it's just convoluted, meaning nothing changed. That's essentially when I see that, there's just differing opinions on whether crime went up or down. Well, we know, right, there was the biggest crime spike was in the 90s, but has largely been going down ever since. That's clear to see. We know that the assault weapons ban from 94 to 2004 had basically zero impact. For some reason, they kind of get lost in the details and say, oh, maybe it did go up a little bit, maybe it did go down a little bit actually. Basically, there was no difference when the NFA actually came along. So what these guys are doing is saying, hey, Biden tried to make all of these people, and let's just be honest, right? Braces are not stocks, okay? They're not comfortable like stocks. People can kind of use them for the same purpose, but it's like, how are we able to make all these people felons overnight, and yet a vast majority of people never complied with it unless they really just wanted free tax stamps? There might have been some people out there that got scared with this whole thing. Totally understand that, but for the vast majority of people, they didn't do anything. They said, I'm not doing nothing. And I know a bunch of people that wanted just free tax stamps. They're like, oh, cool, free tax stamp. Don't have to engrave, I'm good. Point being, we have these types of guns, right? And nothing is happening. So for us to still be paying for the sins of gangsters back in the day when nothing really happened, when they passed this act back then, let's just be honest, it was more of a feel-good type of thing. That's essentially what they're looking at. Time to remove it. Time to move on from another useless law. Basically affects nobody, right? I mean, this is actually a pretty great thing, right? Because you have, over 500,000 SBRs on a registry. You have, 60,000 AOWs, any other weapons. You have 120,000 short barrel shotguns that are all on a registry, right? And you have to pay additional taxes. Asking permission, that is not what the Second Amendment is about. And so getting rid of the NFA. Now, this of course does not address full autos, but it is working in conjunction with the Hearing Protection Act or even the Shush Act. So this would largely eliminate the NFA all the way around. I kind of like this idea, and some people are like, why don't they just repeal the NFA all the way around? Just do it in one massive sweep. And while I agree, I mean, that would be a great thing, I think by them kind of piecemealing this, it helps the odds of getting this stuff passed through, as opposed to just doing it in one shot and then, oh, well, nothing happened, there goes that idea. But the ultimate goal of repealing the NFA, getting it largely taken away, and cutting down the ATF. There's still more things that have to be done, and I don't know if that task force will actually be involved in taking over what the ATF has been doing on a regulatory basis, not the extracurricular activities that we already know about. But I don't know if they take that over and then we just kind of slowly chip away at NFA, GCA. There's a lot of potential here, man. And I don't know about you, but I'm really impressed with how Trump, Ham Bondi, Kash Patel even, and hopefully Dan Driscoll, the things that they're doing to protect and expand Second Amendment rights. I'll say it again, like I've said before, it's one thing to just not talk about gun control and make gun owners feel all fuzzy inside, but it is quite another when you're actually removing infringements that have been there for almost 100 years. This is a really, really big deal, and I don't know about you, but I'm excited to see it. Of course, I'm skeptic, like all of us, and I want to see these things pass before I get, too giddy over it. But now is the time. There will never, ever, in my opinion, there might not be another time where you see this type of solidarity between the Justice Department, the President, the House, the Senate. You may not see it ever again, especially when it comes to the Second Amendment. So this is pretty huge. Of course, that's just my opinion. I'd love to hear yours. Let me know what you think down below. If you like what I do, consider subscribing. See you in the next one. And as always, hold them down.